Want to advertise your business in a cost-effective way? It's time to give podcast advertising a try. Research shows a high rate of podcast listeners made a purchase as a result of an ad they heard on a podcast. Visit podbean.com/brands to launch a cost-effective podcast advertising campaign in minutes. That's podbean.com/brands.
Hello and welcome to episode 88 of the world's first Paul Weller fan podcast. We are live from the Cockpit Theatre in London. Hello, I'm Dan Jennings, and 10 years ago, I gave up my live stream and career as a radio presenter with one big regret: never getting to interview my hero, the legendary British musician, Paul Weller. This podcast, heck, in fact, this entire live show here today exists purely to solve that issue. Welcome to Desperately Seeking Paul. In this episode, recorded in front of you, a live audience. Let's test it. A live audience, yes. Oh, there they are. Yeah. Still with us. My guest is the legendary broadcaster, TV presenter, journalist, A&R man, promoter, and DJ. Heck, is there nothing he cannot do? Gary Crowley. Please welcome Gary Crowley. So excited.
So weird to be the one being interviewed. This is nice, isn't it? This used to be my local theatre as a kid, you know, when I had dreams of being the new Ray Winston or the old Phil Daniels. This was the place that I used to come on a Monday evening. So
like a little youth thing, acting.
Yeah,
thing,
they used to have a Monday evening teenage drama class. So yeah, this would have been about 1974, 1975. I'm trying to remember the actual plays that we did. I'm sure we did one about football hooligans called Zigga Zagga or something like that. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but I of course was not one of the football hooligans. Yeah, so a lot of memories. And it's funny because my sister's here today and I was talking to her. There used to be, I'm not sure if there still is, but there used to be a sort of old school phone box in the reception. And we didn't have a phone at home. We lived on the estate behind this actual theatre, Lisson Green Estate. We didn't have a phone until I joined Capital Radio. Capital Radio insisted when I joined in 1982, said, Gary, you've got to get a phone. I said, yeah, my dad, he's just not going to have it. We were badgering my dad to get a phone. And I'm not having a phone in here. I don't want people ringing up and know my business. And I said, Dad, Capital have said I've got to have a phone. And then I sort of left a pause. I said, oh, by the way, they're prepared to pay for it. Well, all right then, okay. And of course, once we got that phone, could we get him off it, Sue? I mean, he was on it 24. In fact, I remember when we first got it. Do you remember Catweasel when he used to hold the phone the wrong way up? That's what it was like at the beginning. And then he got the hang of it and then you couldn't get him off it.
I love the fact I've not even asked a question.
I'm sorry.
We're already 5 minutes in.
And I haven't even had a
sheer look of panic in my eyes. I'm like, how the heck are we going to fit all this in, Christ? Hey, look, we're going to dig into your love of the jam as a teenager. We're going to dig into the creation of your own fanzine. And you mentioned the radio, obviously this incredible radio career over the past, 40 years, radio and TV career. And interviewing some of the biggest music names in the business. We're talking Bowie, Elton John, Chrissie Hynde, Oasis, Blur, people like that. So I'm hoping I'll pick up some tips from this guy as well. It's like a
be careful what you wish for.
It's like a masterclass for me as well. Right, so let's get into it. How did you first discover the music of the jam?
Well, so rewind and go back to 1975, 1976. I mean, I got the music bug in a big, big way. I mean, my mum and dad split up when we were kids. And I've thought a lot about this recently. I think music became my refuge in a way, really. You know, discovered the Beatles in about 1975, watching an episode of All You Need Is Love, which was entirely devoted to them. And then everything for me became about the Beatles and buying up the records and secondhand shops. And through getting into the Beatles, that kind of sort of took me on a bit of a journey. You know, you start listening to the Rolling Stones and the Kinks and the Who. That also sort of took me into the worlds of youth cults as well. My dad was a teddy boy, claimed to be a teddy boy, bald-headed teddy boy. But my aunt and uncle, Dave and Christine, were very, very cool mods as well. So prior to punk happening, they would come over to the flat. I would almost kind of sort of interview them. I just love talking about music, talking about youth cults. So I think in a way, Dan, I was subconsciously waiting for something like punk to happen. Was buying the music papers. I mean, like everybody else, and I can remember seeing the Pistols on the Today programme, the Bill Grundy interview. interview. And then I noticed this band, The Jam, wearing suits or, being reviewed. And there was one interview in particular, which the band did with the famous Penny Smith cover. I think it was their first Enemy front cover, where they're on Oxford Street and the three of them, and they've got the suits on. I can remember reading that interview and Paul name checking the Beatles and just thinking, oh, he likes the Beatles as well. And, they were talking about Motown, the love of Motown. And yeah, I mean, it just quickly dawned on me that, this was the band for me.
I saw this lovely quote where you said the groups, the records, the clothes, the attitude. We're talking about punk. I lapped it up. So take us back there to that time. Were you a punk? In my head, when I think about punks, I think of the Mohican and all that. But that came later, right? That wasn't really what it was all about.
I was certainly not a punk, with a Mohican or anything.
I think of the guy from the Young Ones, like Vivian from the Young Ones. Punk, yeah. Right? That's not it at all.
That certainly wasn't me. We literally had sort of a couple of halfpennies to kind of rub together. So and that was the great thing about it in a way, really, was that, you could sort of put your own take on it, that DIY ethic, not only about the music, but about the clothes as well. And that was the great thing about the Jam, was that, you could attain that look, that early look, when we think about those suits.
We could all get a Burton suit, right?
Well, exactly. All I had, though, was my school uniform. So the school uniform became, in my eyes, my Jam suit. It literally looked like a Norman Wisdom ill-fitting, but I thought I looked the part. So, yeah, I think that, subconsciously, before hearing this word punk and noticing that there was this sort of plethora of bands coming along, I think I was kind of waiting for it. And the great thing about it as well, Dan, was that I wanted to get involved in some way. I don't know whether it's the same for you guys, but I was that guy in the school playground who had the transistor radio pressed to his ear on a Tuesday lunchtime, counting down, writing down who was going up and who was going down the chart. And if there was a memorable performance on Top of the Pops or the Old Grey Whistle Test or Supersonic, I'd be running into school to sort of talk about, oh, did you see so-and-so and so-and-so last night? So I think I was kind of subconsciously waiting for it. And then after seeing them for the first time at Battersea Town Hall with a group of pals, it was my first concert. I vividly remember sitting on that bus. We had to get 2 buses back to where we lived, this Green Estate, talking about how can we get involved? How can we get involved? Well, we tried having a school band a couple of years previously. One guitar and there was about 12 members. That never happened. But the fanzine thing seemed like the way to go because people were starting fanzines.
Was this a school magazine that already existed that you then took over?
There was a school copying machine there as well, which we were allowed to use. We had a very, very cool English teacher, a lovely fella called Dave Meaden. In actual fact, I saw him for the first time a couple of weeks ago. I did an event over in Twickenham with Mick Talbot and Debsy Wicks from Dolly Mixture. And my English teacher, who I hadn't seen since 1978 when I left, was there, which was, even thinking about that now, it was quite emotional, actually. Yeah. And he was a lovely, lovely fella, really, really supportive. Our school, actually, thinking about it, was a bit of a kind of fame academy because who else went there? Courtney Pine went there and Danny St. Jules, the actor, the dancer, Steve Walsh, the DJ. Phil Daniels went to our school as well. So it was kind of in the DNA, really. It was that thing of wanting to kind of get involved. And that was the great thing, I thought, for me, as a 15-year-old music mad kid, that was the great thing about punk.
I guess a fanzine's like the equivalent now of a blog, right? So this is, but the difference being not only do you have to write stuff, but presumably you're having to take photos, stick them in, put all this together and then photocopy and staple it all up. This sounds like a hell of a lot of effort for 15-year-old kids.
Well, there was a group of us, Dan. There wasn't just me.
Unit.
Yes, there was an editorial team. We had a poet called Dave Durrell, because of course, John Cooper Clarke, we were all in love with as well. And a lovely fella called Chris Clun, who actually gone on to become a very, very respected and successful photographer. My mate Carl Eldridge, Mark Beach was kind of part of that original crew, the Walton brothers as well. So these are the guys that we went to those initial concerts with. Everybody kind of sort of chipped in, but I was the editor, really. Right. So, making the decisions.
We'll come back to the live performance of the Jam, because I really want to dig into that first gig. But in terms of the fanzine, what happens next is incredible. And actually not that far from here, the phone call that you made.
Yes. Well, so I saw the band, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And then literally we got that bus ride home that night. And the question was, how can we get involved? What can we do? So we decided to start the fanzine. And I'd seen a fact file in Melody Maker. It actually had John Weller's contact number on there. Maybury 64717, I think it was, Tufty. Yeah. It's funny how things stay with you. I mean, you didn't have to be Sherlock Holmes to sort of think, well, hold on a minute. John Well has been mentioned in some of the interviews, so he manages them. At least if I ring up, I'm going to speak to him. We had this phone box literally right outside our school. Still there, actually. It kind of became my office at lunchtimes, Dan. I'd be in there with a stack of 2p's, as it was then, or 10p's for a longer conversation. If we got through to somebody, I would ring round the record companies and the PR people, try and blag interviews and tickets and records. I mean, as I said, I think I was literally, living on the very generous pocket money that our auntie, Olive, bless her, would sort of give us. Getting free tickets and records was kind of important in a way, really. I got through to some amazing people. I mean, a few people that I'm still in contact with now. I mean, there's a lovely lady called Moira Bellis, who was the head of Warner Brothers Records PR department. This is early 1977. And I sort of rang up and she just by default answered. Normally that would have been the job of her secretary. And 20 to the dozen, I'm Gary Crowley and we've started this fanzine and, we want to interview all your bands and who have you got? And she sort of said that she literally held it out there, like that. And who is this?
Screaming down.
But she said, listen, when you ring up next time, you ask to be put through to me. And I always did, and I always got through to her, and she's become a lifelong friend. So that's what I did. I saw that number of John's, the contact number, and decided to give it a whirl. And Anne, Paul's mum, answered. And again,
so this is their home phone number. This is the office.
This is the Maybury Estate number. And she answered. And again, I kind of had my sort of routine kind of perfected that I'm Gary Crowley and we love the jam and we're going to call it the Modern World because they'd started doing that as a new song. I thought better that one than London Traffic because that was another new song as well. So yeah, we're going to call it the Modern World. It sounds, punky and vibrant and all the rest of it. She was like, calm down, dear, calm down. And she said, hold on, Paul. Nah. And then he came on and bless his cottons. What are you doing tomorrow? What are you doing tomorrow afternoon? Can you get up to Stratford Place? Can I? Yeah. So me and my mate, I think it was Mark Beach, we got the bus down and, we got there early. And then Paul rocked up with his girlfriend at the time, Jill. Yeah, we were with him for about an hour and a half. And you know what? He hasn't changed that much. I mean, he fascinated about what you were listening to and what, your thoughts were I remember he had a bag of reggae records. He'd been to, one of the reggae shops in Soho or something. And he was kind of sort of talking me through his bag of records. But, I've got the cassette somewhere. And, one day maybe I'll have the chutzpah to sort of play it to people. But if you can imagine,
the squeaky 15-year-old
cave
kid,
boy, a very, very high-pitched voice. Hello, Paul. Yeah. So, what's your favourite colour?
You realise that's how my final podcast is going to sound, right? Big fan, Paul. Big fan.
Didn't stop me. Yeah.
It's funny you say that because Bax who's here today, Bax on the podcast when I chatted with him, talks about Paul being like that now. Like one of the first things he'll ask new people he meets is kind of, what you're listening to, what you're into. That's not changed over 45 years.
No, and that's one of the things, Dan, that I've always admired. He's a fan. I mean, he really is a fan and always eager to sort of tell you what he's listening to, but equally, what are you listening to? What do you like? And, a lot of people kind of lose that, but that's something that he's always kept. And it's funny, walking in here this afternoon, having a little chat with, Derek D'Souza this afternoon, something else that he and the band as well have always been, that's always been important to them is that encouraging young people. And I think that's sort of something that he clearly still does as far as, artists is concerned, with some of those Black Barn sessions. It's, something that's always been important.
And that connection with the fans is so important as well. Right?
Yeah.
So and you're a young fan, you love this band. I just can't get my head around it. I mean, imagine bringing Ed Sheeran up and his mum answers and he goes, Ed, come in. It just doesn't, that's mental.
Yeah. You probably have to get through to a few people. But again, that was the thing. And certainly being in the middle of London, I think, I was very, very lucky. I had a little bit of chutzpah. I do sort of think of myself as being a bit shy, actually. And people sort of find that hard to believe. But, when Joe Strummer's walking down the road sort of in the opposite direction, what are you going to do? I'm not going, and you started a fanzine. Hello. This is my moment. I've got to grab this. So we did, but we were very, very lucky with the fanzine. Got to meet some amazing people, and 1977 will always be a very, very special year, for me.
You mentioned the Jam live in that first gig in Battersea.
Yes.
From that point on, you saw the Jam a lot.
I did. I was really, really lucky because, again, living in the centre of town, I got my first job sort of late summer 1978. I became an office boy in a record company. I decided that I wanted to work in music. I wrote to all the record companies. Only two sort of wrote back. One was a record label called Red Records, who had offices on Wigmore Street, and they offered me a job. But Decca, who had offices on Great Marlborough Street. Now, Decca, of course, in the 1960s had, you know, the Stones and the Small Faces. In 1978, they were probably one of the uncoolest labels going. I mean, their adherence, acknowledgement of punk was Cock Sparrow and Slaughtering the Dogs. You know, could do better. But it was the best first ever job that I, or anyone, you know, I think could have had, because there was such a lovely, lovely bunch of people there. I was there for just under a year, slap bang in the middle of the West End, and I'd come out and, you know, be delivering packages, and, you know, you'd bump into Paul or, you know, Boy George and Marilyn would be coming round the corner, you know, George dressed as Queen Boadicea, or you know, Marilyn dressed as Marilyn, and, you know, this stuff stays with you, you know, and, but the great thing was that I would have to go to a lot of the music papers and, deliver records by Decca artists that they didn't want to review, the Smurfs, or, you know, maybe a Camel album or something like that. But I got to meet the receptionist, the lovely people at the NME, and Danny Baker had just been, promoted to a full-time...
Hold on. Danny Baker was the receptionist.
He was the receptionist before me.
Did anybody ever get through? Because he talks more than you.
Well... Well, he got promoted, Dan, and there was a couple of lovely, lovely girls that I worked alongside, Fiona and Val. So this is 1979 now, and you know, this is the year of Two-Tone, and, you know, all these amazing bands coming out of Manchester and Sheffield and Bristol, and Adrian Thrills, who would be a great person for you to interview for this. Adrian would be bringing in a cool new band every week. Those first couple of jobs were absolutely amazing. And then again, through going out and going to a lot of gigs, I mentioned Moira a little bit earlier on, who was that PR lady at Warner Brothers. Cut a long story short, the Angelic Upstarts of a band called The Fixations were playing at the old Moonlight Club. Don't know if any of you used to go there, but I used to love that venue. I always remember that Angelic Upstarts gig because they kicked a pig's head into the crowd, and the crowd were playing football with it. I always remember that. But Moira's husband, Clive, was there, and Clive was this very, very cool, very stylish, very charismatic radio and TV promotions guy, a plugger, they call him. And it was his job to get the bands played on, you know, the radio and the TV. And his roster was absolutely impeccable. I mean, he had, you know, The Who and Elvis Costello, The Pretenders. He also published them. And I remember he gave me a lift home to literally just around the corner. He called me up the next morning. I was on the receptionist at the NME, and he said, have you got a mate who might want to come and work for me? Oh, by the way, he told me in the car on the way home that he'd just taken on the Jam.
Dennis Mundy brought him in, and he was the guy that broke them on Radio 1.
He was.
The
very, that's right. Yeah. That's right, Dan. Yeah, that was the first record that the Jam got played on daytime radio. Up until that time, it had just been Peely and maybe a little bit of Mike Reid in the evenings as well. And I went, what do you mean, a friend? I'm interested. Well, yeah. He said, well, I did want to ask you. He said, you sounded really, really happy at the NME. So he said, well, come over and see me then. He had a little office in Floral Street. Paul Smith had literally just opened next door. I mean, this is the Covent Garden of the late 70s. So it was really grubby and it was great. I loved it then. And yeah, so he offered me the job. And that's how it kind of started for me in a way, really, Dan, because through being with Clive, you'd go out for lunches with producers and things like that. Things were beginning to sort of relax. I mean, somebody with a strong regional accent at that time being on the radio was still quite a novelty. I mean, I don't know how you guys remember it. I mean, the only one I really remember before Danny started doing the London Weekend Show was Monty Modlin. It was quite an unusual thing, but there was a couple of people that were very supportive. One was a lovely fella called Jeff Griffin, who was the producer of In Concert, and he started using me for bits and pieces. And then I met this lovely guy called Tony Howe, who subsequently became the head of music at Capital Radio, and he rang up one day. Again, I was actually manning the phones that lunchtime. Lee, the receptionist, was out. And I said, hold on, Tony, I'll put you through to Clive. He said, no, I want to speak to you. Oh, okay, yeah. So he said, listen, do you want to come up and see me at Euston Tower later on this evening? Yeah, I can do that. So I went up to see him, and I mean, this is like far out stuff. He said, I think you could be a DJ. And I was like, what? Are you nuts? He said, no. He said, come in a couple of times and, we'll give it a go. And then we gave it a go. And literally about 6 weeks later, I had a Tuesday night programme on Capital. It really,
this is 1980?
This is 82, the beginning of 1982, yeah.
So let's come back to that, because obviously throughout this, the journey of the Jam is, you seeing them in 77, interviewing Paul right at the beginning. So this is the early Polydor first album. They're not yet topping the charts, and suddenly, so as you go through, the live experience presumably gets busier, more raucous, crowds, growing and stuff. But also you suddenly see these people that you've interviewed on Top of the Pops and on at the top of the charts, literally number one album, number one singles and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So as a fan, that must be hugely exciting to see like your band becoming massively popular.
Yeah, I mean, your band is the expression, really. I mean, the Pistols in 1977 couldn't really play. The Jam were my band, followed very, very closely by The Clash. I mean, I absolutely adored The Clash. Got to see them many, many times. If you said to me, if you had to sort of choose
one or the other,
yeah, it would be a very, very difficult, because, they both brought
There's an audience
things.
of Jam fans here, though.
Well, I think they all know that I'm a fan. I think they all know that I'm a fan. But yeah, I mean, both of them on their night were just, absolutely spectacular.
What was it like? So as a young man being in those things, and this is like you said earlier, it's like the first time really there's this proper youth club culture where you're getting your bands for your age. What was it like being in those gigs? Take me there.
Well, the first, I don't know what it's like for everybody else, but that first gig, I think, always stays with you, that first memory. And I can almost sort of see it like a film really unfolding. And it was Battersea Town Hall. The boys were supporting. We got there at 6 o'clock. I remember my dad winding me up saying, you better bring some cotton wool because you'll go deaf, you will. It's going to be so loud. It's going to be so noisy. So who walks in? So it's a very, very cool punk gig with cotton wool hanging out of both of his. Anyway, I quickly sort of tore them out. But we got there at 6 o'clock outside Battersea Town Hall. It was early summer, the end of June. And I remember there was a rumour going around that some Teds were going to turn up from King's Road and there was going to be fisticuffs, a punch-up. I got very, very excited. Not that I would have done anything because I would have been the first one underneath the car. But it didn't happen. But I remember, the doors opening, sort of rushing, right down to the front. And not long after, the boys came on stage, who I thought were absolutely fantastic as well. In fact, the first song that they did was Sick on You. And I remember the hall was about 2/3 full. And I just remember, they started, we're going to be sick on you. I remember looking around and seeing my pals and seeing this sort of massive of pogoing bodies and just thinking, oh my God, I've arrived. This is what it's all about. They were great. And then, the anticipation builds for the Woking Wonders, as I like to call them. Just remember them, rushing out on stage and picking up those gleaming red and white Rickenbacker guitars. Paul and Bruce, and Rick, of course, at the back with I think he was still wearing the shades then, keeping that sort of steady beat, and straight into Art School. I think that was the first song of the set that year, 1977. I mean, just the energy, the energy. The energy was just absolutely fantastic. I mean, it was visceral. It was, it was just so vital, just darting around the stage. I mean, you just didn't know where to look. But for two guys, essentially, obviously, Paul and Bruce, I mean, like demented rabbits, sort of, pogoing and running over there and da-da-da. And I mean, the songs, I knew the songs already because I'd had the album, played that to death. And like I said, a couple of new songs. And just, kind of came out of there. As I said, that kind of feeling of wanting to kind of get involved. I think it's fair to say that night probably changed my life, really.
And am I right in thinking later on, so a few years later, you're introducing the Jam?
I did a couple of things. Yeah, I mean, one time I got to introduce them at the Golders Green Hippodrome for in concert. So that was kind of circa sound effects time. And
so you're looking out on these people ready, anticipating the gig, you're seeing these faces.
That was a surreal moment. Yeah, that was a surreal moment. I remember Paul dedicated Boy About Town to me that night, and I remember, why is he dedicated? No, Pretty Green he dedicated to me. And I remember saying to, Vaughan Toulouse, who was my, buddy, and, Paul was very fond of Vaughan as well. What does he mean by that? Pretty Green, what does he mean by that? I still haven't asked him that. The great thing about working for Clive, who was the band's promotions guy, was that, you would get to go to the Townhouse and kind of hear, what was going to be the next single. And I've got a defining memory of being invited over with Clive and hearing Start for the first time, kind of reeling up after hearing that, and lots of memories. And, one of my fondest as well was occasionally travelling to see the band outside of London. So, we would go up to Birmingham or, Manchester. Newcastle was always fantastic. Glasgow as well. Glasgow had that edge.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool.
Amazing audience. But the Jam, when they played Newcastle City Hall on the Sound Effects tour, Tyne Tees Television filmed that. They asked me to do a couple of little bits and pieces as far as, interviews. So that was pretty special.
There's also, at this point, you mentioned the radio, obviously, and we'll talk about the radio bug because, over 40 years as a broadcaster now.
And it don't seem a day too long.
The youngest radio DJ in the UK. Am I right in thinking whenever Paul sees you, that's what he says to you?
Yeah. And also the other
Even
thing,
now?
he's got a memory like a freaking elephant. He really, really has, because the very first publicity photo that I had done, I've got this little bow tie on. It's kind of sort of circa kind of haircut 100 AB, and he always brings that up. You've still got that bow tie. And it's funny because when I started on the radio, Dan, the announcement was made maybe just afterwards that the band was splitting up. So the only Jam single that I got to play on the radio when it came out was Beat Surrender, so...
And how did you know? Because you're mates with them at this point. So how did you feel? And did you get a heads up?
I don't remember that. I think I think it was kind of sort of kept very, very close, to the immediate band and very sort of close friends like Tufty. So no, I don't remember any sort of heads up. Maybe somebody might have said something just before the music press announced it. And like everybody, it was mixed emotions in a way, really. Obviously, hold on, they're the biggest band in the country. The only band at the time who I can remember who was sort of alongside them as far as popularity was probably The Police, if we're talking 1982.
There's a lot of frowns in here.
Yeah. No, but certainly as far as, the size of the band.
Yeah, they were massive.
They were absolutely enormous. But, so it was, an incredibly brave decision. I can't think of, many bands that have kind of gone out at the top like that, but I think that's why we sort of look back at it with such fondness, because it was never soiled in any way. He was 23, 24, Bruce was 24, 25, Bruce and Rick were 24, 25, so it was so fresh and still so vital.
I think keep rinsing it, and it's not kind of gone on for another 20 years, and we're all like...
they really did go out on, really did go out on a high, who are the other bands who have done that, apart from the obvious ones? So a very, very brave decision. Paul was always, and that was something that I think you sort of sensed, very early on, is that, he was forward thinking, and, his heroes were John, Paul, George and Ringo and the Small Faces, and it was never going to be about, repeating something. It was going to be about, well, let's try this now. And, I think that's why, we're all still interested, because he's still writing classic songs, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing is, the Style Council come around pretty soon after, really. If you think about it, it's not long to catch your breath, and he's on to the next venture, is moving forward. And Paul and Mick were really supportive of you and your radio stuff, weren't they?
They were, yeah. I saw probably a lot more of Paul round about that time, because there was a little sort of gang of us, in a way, who lived in the centre of town. Paolo and Simon, who was doing the artwork. So we would sort of meet for a drink every now and then. And also, socialise a little bit as well. Got some good memories of going to see, brass construction at the venue in Victoria. But, I've always been a fan, and I've always sort of remembered that. Paul doesn't live too far from where I live, but, I don't see him too often. Maybe a cup of coffee or... there was a very surreal moment. I don't know if you saw the picture, Dan, about a month or so ago. Can I tell this story? I don't know if you saw this photograph, folks. So basically, I was meeting a mate of mine, Kevin the Cabbie, as I like to call him, and we met in Maid of Vow, and anyway, so we're getting a coffee, and then Glenn Matlock sort of rocks up alongside. Oh, can I join you? Yeah, of course. Yeah. Sit down. So we're kind of sort of chatting away, and I've got my back to the road, and all of a sudden I get this tap on the shoulder. Oh, I know that voice anywhere. Oh, hello, darling, how you doing? And I swing round, and it's Lulu.
Oh, Lulu.
And it's Lulu. Oh, hello, how are you? Oh, good, nice to see you. And I could see Glenn was very excited about Lulu sort of being there, and we started chatting. I asked her if she'd seen Summer of Soul, because she loves soul music, and she hadn't seen it, so we were talking about that. And I don't know, we started talking about some of the people that lived in the area, and she said something about Paul, and she said, yeah, I don't think that Paul was particularly a fan of mine. I'm sorry if you're Scottish. I apologise for my accent. It's the best I can do, I'm afraid.
It sounds like Mrs. Doubtfire.
I'll take that. And she said, I don't think Paul was particularly a fan of mine because of my politics in the 80s. And I went, well, you can talk about it to him because he's coming up the road. And then he's coming in the opposite direction. And they're all there on that corner. And I just thought, I've got to take a photograph. This is quite a surreal moment, this. And I said, look, would you mind, everyone, if I took a photograph? And this didn't come out afterwards, Dan, but Glenn sort of ambled off. Lulu ambled off. And literally, me, Paul and Kevin were sat there, chatting away. And then Chrissy Hine came round the corner. I mean, talk about Stella Street. It was quite a surreal moment. But yeah, so
imagine that as a supergroup, though, man.
It was very, very bizarre, very bizarre. Yeah, quickly went viral that photograph.
There are a few little connections during this time that I wanted to talk about with radio stuff. So how did you feel about the Style Council for out the gate in terms of that new material? Because we have a run of incredible singles. We have Café Blur. He's really mixing it up. It's so different every time. You couldn't pigeonhole them at all.
No,
but you were clearly a fan as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the great things about the last couple of years was being asked by Liam Mark to do the bulk of the interviews for the Style Council Long at Summers documentary, kind of going back and listening to that stuff and I suppose in a way kind of reappraising it. I thought that the early 80s was a very, very exciting time because, of course, when you think about punk, it was about going to gigs and, fast forward to about 1980, 1981, the dance floor became very, very important. And it wasn't so much about going to gigs as well. It was, records and could you dance to it? I think, the Style Council, like, a lot of those sort of great post-punk, pop-funk bands, if you like, were very much a part of that. The thing that really came across, right at the beginning doing those interviews was that, this band, it was going to be about the songs really and who was going to be right for that specific song.
Yeah, it was so fluid, wasn't it? Different members, the honorary councils that we hear so much about.
I mean, I think it's either Mick or Paul jokes about it in the document. We were doing this, 30 years before Massive Attack. But you thought, you're right. Yeah, I mean, thinking back to those final gigs, Dan, of the Jams, Brighton and Guildford, it was very, very blokey. Brighton especially. I remember coming away from Brighton and feeling a little bit depressed about it, really, because it was like a football crowd in a way, really. There was a dance troupe who went on. I don't know if...
Didn't they get booed off?
Yeah. Well, I was one of that dance troupe as well. And honestly, I saw I saw my life flash before my eyes that evening. But the nice thing about the Style Council, I think, was that, there was kind of a sort of a loosening, a kind of softening in a way. And in actual fact, thinking back to some of those early Style Council shows, there were a lot more girls there as well. And it was more, like a 50-50 audience.
It's softer, but still, I mean, that band at times is so funky. I mean, the songs stack up as well.
Yeah, and angry as well, and, I think that's, talking about him, that's what makes him, such a great sort of songwriter, like all the best ones. He can do it all in a way, really. If you want the rousing, he can do that. And but if you want, something sort of soft and otherworldly, like Gravity, which is like one of my all-time favourite songs, or Village or something. I mean, it's just,
There are a couple of things I wanted to talk to you about, particularly with the Style Council. So one was our favourite shop. I don't know if you got the cassette. If you had the cassette, there was this little bit with you doing it was like half hour, 45 minutes.
Yes.
Of you interviewing them about the songs and chatting with them throughout. So how did that come about?
Well, I think that cassette at that time was kind of king in a way, really, wasn't it? It was a way that a lot of people did listen to their music. So, the idea was, mooted, would you be up for interviewing us for that? So dutifully trotted off down to the studios, Stanhope Place. Yeah, I think that was quite a coherent one in a way, really, because there's been a few other interviews that haven't been as coherent as that as well.
There was one where...
I'll tell you the Stanley Road story if you like.
Oh, go on. Well, go on. Yeah. I was going to ask you, so there was a Frosty interview around that time in 1985, I think, with Weller.
Well, there was one when him and Mick came in and, I don't know, it was just very, very in and I don't think anybody would have got it, really. And, let's just say that they were playing up. And, that was funny because I remember we all sort of met for a coffee afterwards and I think he knew that I was pissed off and he was sort of mulling this over, and it was almost like that scene in the Bitterest Pill video when he slams his hand down on the table and the cups go flying out. I didn't fucking like you so much, Crowley, I'd knock your head off. And then he sort of flounced out of the coffee shop. I was like, what was that all about? Where did that come from? But yeah, great days. Great days. Yeah, bless him. He called up after. But yeah, sorry, Knobbly. It was a little bit out of order there. But
what does he call you?
Knobbly. GC the Knobbly Knee. Yeah. That was my alter ego sort of rap name, sort of 82. So it was all, right, Knobbly. Yeah.
That's the Stanley Rose story then.
Oh, no. That was, I think he'd been out and had a few sherbets before the show. And of course, Wildwood had gone through the roof and the anticipation for this. Paul was going to come in and do a track by track exclusive interview. And then he walks into the studio and says, let's keep the chat down to a minimum and just play the music. And I'm like, what? Are you nuts? Yeah, I think we got away with it. It's interesting because I think back in the day, I think that, being interviewed wasn't something that he particularly enjoyed. That's something that now, the last 20, 30 years, I think he enjoys it. He's a lot more relaxed about it now. Whereas, I think back in the day, it was like, the music should do the talking really. And, I wouldn't
have wanted to do this podcast back and it seemed like he was terrifying.
Yes.
If you watch some of them and he absolutely destroys the interview. I mean, I don't think he ever did that with you, Richard.
Yes. Well, what's your definition of destroy?
Well, some of them, I would have been like a quivering wreck in the corner,
Yeah. He could be tricky. He's got teeth, but yeah.
At the end of last year, Chris Bostock was on the podcast, Joe Boxer's honorary counsellor, and he talked about these PAs, these club nights that you did.
Yeah, one of the first things, actually, somebody reminded me about this on social media a week or so ago, Dan, that there was a Responder Under 18s event that happened at the Drill Hall just off Gower Street in Covent Garden. Vaughan was DJing, I was DJing, I think Paul was DJing, I think maybe The Questions and Tracy were playing live. And I think the idea was that, to try and get a younger audience into these bands as well, rather than going through the tried and soiled music press of the time. So it was, I guess, an attempt to sort of try and get to the audience, and hopefully the idea being that, that there might be more, but there wasn't. But I thought that was a great idea. And then, once I was DJing, I was on there, I was starting to be offered to do DJ stints and club nights and things like that. Then I got offered this one in particular, which was out in South Harrow called Bogarts. We were given Tuesday nights, which was the sort of dead night of the week, really. We built it up. It was a really special vibe for a couple of years. It was a really, really young crowd as well. It was kind of late teens. I don't think the eldest person in there would have been 22 or 23. I mean, I was 19, 20. And we started getting bands along to kind of come and do PAs. Paul and Mick came and do one, which was kind of pretty unheard of, really. I mean, they sort of, I've got the photos. I mean, nobody had cameras then, so none of this stuff, sadly, hasn't been sort of captured. But it was a really special vibe, because George and Andrew from Wham lived round the corner, so they would kind of swing by, and the Bananas would come along. And I always remember we had the Rocksteady crew came and did a PA for Hey You Rocksteady crew, and they had their dancers and their DJ as well, scratching. And I'd never seen that up close before. I mean, this is 82, 83. That was pretty far, kind of far out
just
stuff.
Do what, to a backing track, or was it because presumably they're not bringing all the instruments and everything else?
I think that they did. My memory is that they did Long Hot Summer, which was which was a big record for us at the club. And yeah, I mean, there are photos where they're sort of drunkenly sort of ricocheting around the stage. But I always remember him saying to me that night, "This is our audience. This is the audience that we want," because it was that kind of mix of girls and boys, and it was a young, up for it crowd as well.
Well, we'll come back to the Style Council, because I think one thing as a radio presenter that I always loved, particularly the early 90s when Weller was coming back as a solo artist, was those radio sessions. And there were some really special ones. And it seemed to me he would just pop into like radio shows with an acoustic guitar, nothing else, and just play sometimes covers, like things like Black Sheep Boy and stuff like that. These things would then become bootlegs and you'd be sharing with your mates and stuff. And there was a couple of yours that were on there. That must have been so special to have this guy who, yes, he's your mate, but also you're a fan of his music. He's back on top and he's playing sessions on your radio show.
Well, I was on GLR at that time, which was a great radio station where
Danny Baker and Chris Evans,
Chris Morris, and I mean the list goes on and on. Some amazing people on the station, and it was slap bang in the middle of the West End. It was on Marylebone High Street, and a lot of the people that worked there were really, really cool as well. My producer, who remains a very, very good friend, is a guy called Jim Lahat. Jim got on very well with Paul and the band. And, like anything, if you feel comfortable and, the people are nice and they're welcoming, you want to go back, you want to go and do it again. And I think, Jim had sort of, made it known that he was kind of receptive to any ideas. Paul and Paolo at that time, I think, did a radio show for a while, didn't they? Radio Woking. Radio. Yeah.
Okay.
I've got cassettes of that. I mean, I think they recorded about 4 episodes of that. I think, Ocean Colour Scene swung by and Noel and other people as well, maybe the Chemical Brothers. So yeah, it was a lovely atmosphere, and the studios were great. The equipment was kind of old school as well, which I think appealed to everybody. It was very kind of laid back, anything sort of went.
It must be really special to hear those songs for the first time live as well, because sometimes he'd rock up and he'd play songs that clearly weren't finished either. They were like work in progress, and you're hearing them for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, never take that for granted. I certainly don't. It's funny because Mark's in my eye line here, and I've got a memory of going down to the studio and hearing some bits and pieces that made it onto True Meanings. And I think me and him on the train going back from Ripley up to Waterloo, it was like, how lucky are we, to sort of be sat there with the man, with the band, getting to kind of hear this stuff. It's pretty far out stuff.
A few people on the podcast have mentioned listening parties as well. So Rhoda Dakar mentioned listening party. I think Max Beasley mentioned. So when an album's finished, generally you'll get presumably all your mates.
Yes.
But it's not like a load of critics or people who are going to review it necessarily, but it's just, come round, I want to play you the new album. You get it on the big speakers at Black Barn, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
You've had that experience?
I'm not sure whether I've actually been to a listening party, so I don't know whether I've upset somebody, but I have changed my number recently, but no, I mean, I've only been a couple of times, as I said. I mean, the True Meanings one, kind of sticks out just to, to kind of be there, sort of hearing it, loud, and you've got the person who's kind of the band, as well as Charles and those guys sort of around you. It's pretty amazing.
45 years on from that first album now, and we're still smashing out the park. I think we're in the 6th decade of number 1 albums. He's just had 2 number 1 albums on the trot on Sunset, Fat Pop.
He's so prolific. I've thought about this. I mean, we were talking about 1977 and that original sort of wave of bands, and I'm trying to sort of think of someone else who came out of the traps when the Jam did, when Paul did, who still has that prolific work ethic. I can't, maybe Elvis Costello, but there's been some big gaps with Elvis, and Elvis is older than Paul as well, isn't he, by a couple of years, I think. His sort of work ethic is absolutely amazing, and but the quality control is still, listening to the last album and Shades of Blue, or what's the other song that I love, the one with the girl from the Mysterines, Is It True? It's like that quality is still there, and there's not many that you can sort of say that about, I think, really. I can't really think of a time, really, I'm not sure if I've admitted in front of this lot, but when the quality control has kind of dropped.
Which album do you think was crap, Gary?
That's a good question. Let me think about that, and I'll get back to you for part 2. No, but seriously, I don't think he wouldn't let it. The way that he sort of tests himself, that wouldn't happen, I don't think, really.
And still experimenting, still pushing forward, still trying new things. Even you think like a few years back, off the back of True Meanings, we had other aspects and the Royal Festival Hall gigs. It's
yes.
Like, for the first time, like playing properly with a full orchestra.
That was amazing. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. We went to that, and that was beautiful. That was a lovely evening, and great to hear those songs and a lot of those old songs, done in that way. Amazing. So, yeah.
Hey, look, I feel like we've only scratched the surface here. So we're going to need a part 2 on this, definitely. But I've got 2 final questions for you.
Okay, yes.
On the podcast. You're allowed 1 Paul Weller song for the rest of your life.
Yes, because I'm a fan of the podcast. I knew that this one was coming, and we should go round the room, actually, and ask everybody the answer to this, because, obviously I can't speak for you, but it does change all the time. And I've really given this some sort of serious thought. I mean, Gravity, I think, is just one of the most beautiful songs. I absolutely love that. I mean, Long Hot Summer takes me back to, a holiday in 1983 and having a cassette of that EP. I think it was the first time that I'd ever gone to Spain, and we played that for, 10 days, that EP. So, Long Hot Summer is a favourite, but I'm going to go with Life from a Window. And sharp intake of breath. And the reason why I've gone with Life from a Window is because I just love the dreamlike quality of it. I think it's a great song. I mean, I loved the album at the time when I got my hands on it. This is the modern world I'm talking about. But I don't know, I just love that kind of sort of dreamlike quality, you know, that kind of metaphor for life, if you like, in a way, you know.
We've not really talked about him as a wordsmith, somebody who can write lyrics with meaning.
Yes.
Such a bit with the Style Council, I guess, with the political stuff. But the way he uses words to connect with us, these audiences.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think of the opening line now to Live from... Yeah, I'm sitting on a hilltop, you know, up here it don't seem nice. That's okay. I love that song. And I just love that kind of dreamlike vibe to it. So today, Live from a Window would be my answer. But tomorrow, it would be... Yeah. It would be something. I mean, Village, when I heard Village, I was just like, wow, that's a classic for my money. You know, just absolutely, you know, a stone cold classic. Yeah.
Okay. Final question. So, purpose of this podcast is to talk to amazing people like yourselves, these incredible careers, these connections with Paul Weller. And as I say, I feel like we've only dug into a few of them. So we need to record another bit for the rest of it. Purpose of this podcast really is for me, and the purpose of the live show, folks, I'll be honest with you, is to get that interview with Paul Weller that I never managed during my radio career. Nowhere near as successful as yours, but I don't know if you remember the Dan Jennings Breakfast Show on XFM, sponsored by Sunsilk. No?
Sunsilk?
Sunsilk.
They wouldn't sponsor me.
Yeah, purpose is to get that interview with Paul. If it happens, what should I ask him?
Oh, God, Jesus, right. Oh, fucking Nora. Sorry, did I say that? Oh, God, that's a good question.
Is there something you'd like to know but can't ask him as a mate or something like that?
That's a good question as well. If he had to, I mean, because he's so prolific, if he had to choose one album out of everything where he feels that he really, really got it right, what would that album be for him? I was listening to 22 Dreams a couple of weeks ago, and that's one of my favourite albums. You know, I mean, I always remember hearing that for the first few times and just thinking where it goes, you know, that kind of mix of kind of, you know, vibes of themes and music. It, you know, it's like a jukebox in a way, really. I love that album. So that would be my question. If he had to, you know, there's out of all of the stuff that he's done with everybody, what's the one that he would be most sort of proud of if you had to keep one?
Love it, love it, love it. Right, we've got time for two questions, I think, from this lovely audience here.
Are they awake?
No, she's still there.
What was it like working with the Smurfs?
Yes. Yeah, he's got a good memory, that one. Yeah. Yeah.
When you first said that, I had assumed that it was some punk band at the time.
Yes.
And then it was as you then, and then I was like,
yeah,
oh no,
or a
actually
rap
you
group.
mean the actual Smurfs.
Yes. When I was the office boy, Tufty knows, when I was the office boy at Decca Records, I mean, as I said, you know, despite it being the best first job that anyone could have asked for, such a lovely, amazing group of people. Yeah, the only success that they were having was with the Smurfs. And I remember I took Father Abraham once down to a cab carrying the outfits because they were taking him over to Top of the Pops. But yeah, in answer to your question, we're just good friends.
The blue shirt and the lovely pocket handkerchief.
Oh, lovely. The lovely thing about this is that, and this, you know, this man, the music, the bands that he's been in, you know, bringing us all together, is that, you know, Alex and Jerry are sort of friends, and Stuart's here as well, you know, people that I've kind of got to know through social media and the radio show. So it's so lovely to kind of put a face to both of you. Luther Vandross fans, I think. Yeah. Jerry, I'll have to introduce you to my sister because she loves a bit of Luther as well. But anyway.
Has Paul forgiven you for suggesting Come to Milton?
Oh, that's a good question.
This is a great question. So has Paul forgiven you for suggesting Come to Milton Keynes as a single?
This has come back to haunt me. I mean, yeah, I mean, I love that track. I mean, I love that album. I mean, it's my favourite Style Council album. I love Confessions, though, as well. I think Confessions is a fantastic album. And again, I love the kind of moods and different feel of that album. But I loved, I mean, I'm struggling now. Oh, my voice is going up. I love Come to Milton Keynes. But I thought, you know, I can remember saying to him, this is your Penny Lane. This is going to be it. Honestly, this is going to be. And it only got to the dizzy heights of something like 23. And then I remember after it had started going down, it's the last fucking time I listen to you. I just loved the kind of effortless feel to that. But yeah, that was fun. It's not fucking time I listen to you.
Gary, this has been fabulous. Thanks so much for joining me, man.
Gary Crowley.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Dan. Can I just say something very, very quickly? Honestly, absolutely nailed it. And what a fantastic idea as well. It really, really is. And again, you know, without sort of getting too sort of Away with the Fairies and stuff. But, the power of music and the way that this fella who we've been talking about, his music has sort of touched the lives of so many of us and continues to do so. That's kind of pretty special. And, boy, do we need it in these dark and troubled times as well. Well done, Dan.
Oh, bless you. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank you, Gary Crowley.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna put some tape in the machine now and do it properly, all right? So that was the run through.
Well, there you go. That was so special. Gary Crowley, live from the Cockpit Theatre in London, recorded just a few weeks ago. Another brilliant, brilliant guest. And I barely think we even scraped the surface on his Weller stories. So there needs to be a part 2 at some time, right? Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please make sure you share on your social media channels. Don't forget to give us a follow on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And I'd love it if you could give us a 5-star review as well. It all helps us to find new listeners to the show. Next up on the podcast, our second episode recorded at the Cockpit, Tufty. Steve Tufty Carver, one of Paul's very best friends from the past 45 years, joins us on the podcast next. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.